time now for French Connections, our weekly look at the intricacies of life here in France with my colleague, Florence Villeminot. And this week, we're going to focus on French politics. The fall of French governments used to be a rare occurrence, but now it's become close to mundane. So in this show, we're going to be putting the spotlight on how the actual institutions work, particularly the role of the prime minister.
Well, it's been described as the toughest job in French politics, and that is due to the specific way that the French executive works. And we're going to dive right in with our word du jour. It's a great word if you're a Scrabble fan. It's bicéphalisme, which is bicéphale is to have two heads. So you get the idea. The French executive is a two-headed monster. On the one hand, you have the president, directly elected by the people, and you also have the prime minister, named by the president and responsible before the parliament.
Now, the relationship between the French president and the prime minister, I mean, it's outlined by the French Constitution, but depending on who's in power, there can be some elasticity.
There's room for interpretation,
yes.
Essentially. Let's take a look at the French Constitution, though. Article 20 defines the role of the government and, by extension, the role of the prime minister. So you can see the job description here. The government shall determine and conduct the policy of the nation. It has at its disposal the civil service and the armed forces, and it shall be accountable to Parliament. So this sounds like a very powerful position, but in practice, the French prime minister actually has less power than, say, the prime minister of the United Kingdom, which is confusing because it's the same name, right? But they're not even as much of a permanent sidekick as, say, the vice president in the United States. For instance, the prime minister of France does not replace the president if he or she is to pass away in office. So what you need to know is that in France, it's really the president who calls the shots and sets the tempo.
Okay, so the French presidency, uniquely, immensely powerful. In fact, some experts say that it's the most powerful office in the democratic world.
That's right, and critics say that the French president is the closest thing in the developed world to an elected dictator. Now, one of the perks of being the president is that you get to appoint the prime minister to do all your grunt work. In French, we say that it is the premier ministre fait, le président fait faire, so the prime minister does what the president delegates, essentially. The prime minister is essentially a manager who runs the day-to-day affairs of the that have been decided by the president, and the prime minister is actually essentially at the disposal of the president if he or she needs a quick reset. It's they're kind of a lightning rod to take the heat away. They're on an ejectable seat, essentially. Let's listen to the former president François Mitterrand talk about the role, and he does it in kind of an ice-cold way because he's talking in front of a former prime minister, Michel Debré.
Le Premier ministre, et c'est le cas aujourd'hui, n'est que l'exécutant des décisions qui, pour la conduite des affaires de la nation, sont prises à l'Élysée.
I've heard the roles sometimes described as, you have the show horse and then the workhorse
Exactly.
in the prime minister. So we can look at where the prime minister's offices are located too. The residence, the offices located on the left bank of Paris, across the river from the Élysée Palace, which is where the president lives and works.
That's right. It's called Matignon. In French politics, when you talk about Matignon, you're talking about the prime minister, much like when you talk about the Élysée, you're talking about the president. So that's where they work and live, but they're always on the move. For instance, every Wednesday morning, they head to the Élysée Palace for the weekly ministers' council. Several times a week, they're in front of Parliament to face lawmakers or participate in debates. And the rest of the time, they're crisscrossing the country to essentially put out fires. Let's listen to the former Prime Minister François Fillon talk about his time at Matignon.
C'est un poste où on est 7 jours sur 7, 24 heures sur 24, en alerte. On ne coupe pas son téléphone portable la nuit. Il se passe tout le temps quelque chose. On vous prévient dès qu'il y a un accident grave, un incident international. Donc il y a une pression du quotidien, il y a une pression des événements qui fait qu'on ne s'appartient plus du tout. Ce qui pour moi était une grande nouveauté puisque j'avais toujours réussi en 30 ans de vie politique à garder des vacances, des week-ends, des moments de vraie coupure. Là, il n'y a pas de moment de coupure.
And Florence, political commentators have likened the role of prime minister to the hardest job in politics.
It's certainly a thankless job because you're stuck between the hyper-powerful president pulling the strings, the turbulent parliament that's trying to topple you, ministers who might want your job, and then the very critical media, too, that's holding you to account. So some have gone so far as to describe Matignon as a hell. All you have to do is listen to some former prime ministers.
Quand on est Premier ministre, on ne sait jamais pour combien de temps.
La vie d'un responsable politique, notamment d'un Premier ministre, c'est vrai que ce n'est pas une tâche facile, c'est extraordinairement contraignant.
Beaucoup de gens croient que le pouvoir est agréable. Eh bien, à l'expérience, le pouvoir n'est pas agréable.
You know, it's a wonder anybody takes this job, and it only seems to be getting harder.
It certainly is. Now, if you look, for instance, at the prime ministers who have spent the fewest amount of days in Matignon, you'll see that several of them are quite recent. In fact, there have been a record number of prime ministers in recent years, and it seems to be due to the very divided political climate. And essentially, this is mission impossible to stay a prime minister. It's so bad that apparently people are even turning down the role. So if you want to be a prime minister, Charlie, just send your CV to the Élysée Palace.
Gonna get right in line. Sounds like I really have the qualifications for it. Florence Villeminot, thank you so much. Always a fun segment here. And that's all for this show. But if you want more French connections, you can always check out the previous episodes on our website, France24.com.